Hello, how is everyone doing today? Good?
Hi, everybody.
Good. How you doing?
Today we're talking about mid-bosses within the concept of dungeons, or even not inside the dungeons, like just mid-bosses in general. The not necessarily the big bads, but they are boss monsters themselves. Not to be confused with Boss Monster, the board game, which is also really cool, but that's off topic. So why not we just we can do we've done a lot of these already. We don't need to introduce ourselves again, but like just for sake, we can just say hi, I'm Kyle, I guess.
Hi, Kyle.
Oh man, don't make this
I'm Bliss Reason. Yeah, I'm Bliss Reason, as always. Creator of Ishanek World Shapers.
Hey, this is Jeff with Big Campaign Pod.
This is Eternal GM.
Okay. So let's go ahead and get dug into this topic. We are talking about mid-bosses. So unlike what we did last time, I am going to let's start off the conversation by just brain dumping and discussing what we already like. What are our definitions for a mid-boss? What do we think they are, and stuff like that. We'll go ahead and start with Jeff, and then we will move counterclockwise. So it'd go Jeff, Blaze, and then Eternal, and then myself, and then we'll on the next topic I'll start, and then we'll go reverse. We'll just do that back and forth. That's fine. I'll stop talking. Jeff, go.
All right. So, as far as the defining a mid-boss, to how I see it, I think they exist in an interesting space as a mid-boss. The idea there is to challenge the players, to create difficulty, but the intent of a mid-boss is always to lose, as opposed to a main boss, which it can have varied effects, right? If the players win, players lose. But mid-bosses, I think, are a really fun place to really try out a lot of the weird things that maybe new mechanics, new abilities, things like that.
Okay, cool.
Blaze?
Yeah, Blaze.
So, what's a mid-boss? I think mid-boss are an important part, right? If you have like the whole campaign, the mid-boss are like the little peaks before you end up with the climax at the end against the big boss. So I think they need to be epic to a certain degree. Of course, at the early stages of the adventure, this could be just something like an ogre. Later on, maybe like an elite lieutenant of the big bad evil guy, and so on. So they are like different levels of mid-bosses, and what could be a mid-boss at early game could be a minion in the end game, right?
Okay, yeah.
Kind of reminds me of the video games where you have like those mini-bosses at the beginning who later turn into regular enemies, like in Dark Souls.
Yeah, which is also a really neat little thing, because that in particular really helps sell how the characters have progressed. But yeah. What about you, Eternal?
Well, I feel like I may have been calling them the wrong thing like my whole life playing video games and tabletop. I called them mini bosses because like they're a mini obstacle compared to the boss, but
Right.
they're meant to be something that grows. So I never called them a mid or an early or a late game boss. I just referred to them as like, what is the size of impact you have on the story? Like to me, the mini boss could be something that has comic relief. Like it could be something all the way to, oh, this is a character you've trusted. It could be anything. It's one of the really creative type of bosses I love utilizing for story development. Like specifically, I've been playing through the Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 1 and 2 series from the PS2 and I think Xbox 360 era. Love those stories. But the whole thing where there's this guy you like killed in the first one, and he arrives in the second one, and you're like, wait. Well, from the gameplay, you're seeing the bad guy's story, but in a tabletop, you're not seeing that progression. So that's like that return of the villain. So it progresses the story to tie the first campaign to the second campaign. So a mini boss can do all sorts of stuff. To me, they're the most valuable boss, but also the least important ones. Like, they're not going to be ending your campaign, but they got more variety of usage than a final boss. A final boss is meant to be that.
Okay. Like, yeah. I think that's to kind of like sum up and also throw in my own points. Like, mid bosses are there to be obviously the midpoint, right? Or maybe not midpoint, but they're kind of like the points of which you and the characters are showing that they've grown, and they are in essence supposed to be won. I mean, arguably they could still be tough fights, especially when we talk about like video games and stuff. But really, they are kind of the midpoint of like, if you can't beat this mid boss, you don't have a chance against the actual boss, because that's the narrative like goal, is to kind of like going, yeah, no, maybe you can do it if you defeat it, but if you can't, then well, something, you're not there yet within the story. That being said, and one of the points that you said, Eternal, about the calling them wrong, I've also heard the term mini boss, but I know that mid boss is accepted because of actually a video game series. So I guess I'm going to start this with, what is your favorite non-TTRPG mid boss that you've seen, right? So obviously this is mostly for video games and stuff, I guess, but we could arguably see this within like some other concepts of media, I'm guessing. I mean, maybe movies that pander to video game enthusiasts may have some sort of joke about a mid boss. But favorite mid bosses, and the one that I'm going to throw there out is actually the one that I know that entire purpose is to kind of poke fun of the meta that is mid bosses, and that's mid boss himself from the Disgaea series. Which, again, the entire joke is that his nickname is Midboss. He actually has an actual canon name, I believe, but main character always just calls him Midboss, and he is narratively within that game the Midboss. But like, it's just constantly thrown of back and forth about him being that Midboss and whatnot. And it's just a really interesting way to kind of like break down the meta of a mid boss in that sort of game. Of course, the Disgaea series is all about that. They love to break meta in weird ways like that. Nis America does great when it comes to the games that do that. So that's just my opinion. But what about you guys? Eternal, I'll go back to you and whatnot.
Man, I've got one that like I thought of as soon as I was like, well, what am I going to think of? And I was like, oh, I'm next. It's the Earth Dragoon from Legend of Dragoon. Okay. That character, you repeatedly had to fight. So he checks off the boxes of, he's testing you at what abilities you have. Because at first he's just hitting you. Next time he's doing good at the multi-attacks. The next time he's got extra items and spells. Then he gets a Dragoon Spirit. Then he joins your team because it's like, hey, I can't beat you, so, let's join you. But he's comic relief. He's like intense moments. Like there's this one time a village or a town's under attack and he just shows up and it's like, this is the last thing we need right now.
Yeah.
There's also a time where it shows up and he just had, I don't remember what it was. He runs up and he's got stuff falling off him, and chickens flying somewhere. And it was just some moment that made me spit my drink up. So it like hits all the points. It ties each disc together. It ties deep lore together in the game. To me, it hits the definition of it to a key, even if it's not a very memorable character. That's just bad character design, even if they did great story design with him.
Sure. Yeah. Blaze, what about you?
Sorry, what exactly was the question again? Other than it's about Midbosses.
What's your favorite one from a non-TTRPG?
Favorite Midboss from a non-table RPG.
I mean, we can jump to Jeff while you ponder that. For
a second. Sorry. I have to. I'm preparing a game parallelly. So
I mean, you're thinking about your
Midboss. I only need the background music.
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
I only need the background music, and then I'm done. But okay, sorry,
That's fine.
Kind of run out of time today to focus.
Hey man, things happen. We're fine. It's chill here. Jeff, go.
I mean, I could make excuses like, "Oh, it's the heat," but I guess I prefer to be honest, even though it's embarrassing.
Oh, it's all good. I've been there.
Yeah, when I think of Midbosses, actually, I often think of the Zelda games for having mastered what a mid-boss kind of is. Because you're going to have like 6 of them in one game, right? Like every Bongo Bongo or Volvo the Safety Dragon, whatever monster you kind of get to, they're always a great representation of how far you along in your story with Link. Have you mastered these abilities? But they're all meant clearly to be defeated, so you can eventually get to Ganon, which is the big deal. And so I think those generally have my favorite because you get a really wide variety of styles and monsters and things that you all have to practice with and kind of show off what you're actually good at.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally I can definitely get behind giving credit to Zelda, but I'm not gonna fanboy in here. Not right now.
No, but I do say for a later stream, the idea of how many things the Legend of Zelda series of video games has gotten 100% down, and like they are a consistent reference. Might be interesting to talk about what TTRPGs can learn from certain video games.
Oh yeah, I would be definitely down for a discussion like that. So, Blaze, did we give you enough time to ponder for a second?
Yes, I did think about it. And of course, Zelda has many great mid-bosses. That's also like the first thing I thought about, maybe a Zelda one. But I think another game that is excellent at boss design is the Dark Souls series. Specifically, Dark Souls 3, I think, has the best bosses out of the series. Okay. And I thought about Worth of the Boreal Valley. I don't know if you remember him. He's like the first real boss after the tutorial boss, which I mean, the tutorial boss also already really kicks ass. But what I like about him is he's, of course, if you're a beginner, he's a challenge. He's posing like this huge, almost animalistic guy in this massive armor, wielding this huge, mace, and with this frost aura. But he's still, at least in the first phase, relatively slow, relatively predictable. And once you experience, you can just deal with him pretty easily. And I like this dynamic of a good challenge for a beginner, but a breeze for the experienced one. And of course, he's just like a very early boss, right? So, nothing compared to the later on juggernauts that you find in the game. But I think he does his job really well at this introductory boss.
I am one of those people that loves the lore and the gameplay of that game, but I cannot beat even the beginning intro fight in the third one. The second one, I can make it pretty far, but then there's just a cold stop.
Right.
My friend is using this Braun thing to let us co-op Elden Ring so I don't die, so I actually get to enjoy one of them.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, Elden Ring is nice in that having that co-op capability. But kind of going with that, I will honestly say I've never played the third of that game, actually. And I've barely even played the first one, to be honest. I'm not really big on games that make me depressed. When you read this, read into the story, and that's kind of the entire concept of those, is that there is literally pretty much no hope whatsoever. So, good job.
Oh yeah. I watched this one fight where it's just like, this is the world is like having to go against this person. You're summoning all these spirits around you. You're all fighting like it's basically a battalion of freaking badasses versus one guy. You kill him, and then the entire sky falls. And you're like, wait, what? You look into his lore, he had less than 1% of his freaking power. He's holding up all this, and his ability to control gravity was because of his horse. And then you're like, wait, that's what that thing was? And you realize, oh yeah. So like, no, that you're right. That game is very depressing because it's like you got good enough to defeat that, but you really you weren't anything.
I mean, I totally agree. I also do not like sad stories, especially if it's like a series or a movie. Like all of my favorite series are like happy and optimistic, and I mean, I watch a lot of cartoons for a reason, right?
Right.
But with and of course, I'm also I love lore, and the lore of the Souls games and of Elden Ring is excellent. But I played it mostly because of the gameplay. And in most Souls-like games, I just look at the gameplay and isolate everything else. So I'm just looking at the numbers, at the challenge, and then I don't get depressed by the horrible, horrible story.
Right. If you don't pay attention, it doesn't exist. Key, right?
Right.
No,
You're just a pile of pixels. You're just a pile of pixels.
The definition of a this is fine meme.
Actually, that does. Thinking of that though, there is one boss that I kind of want to like point at from that series that I do remember getting to, and the opening cinematic was really cool, and I just want to make a note of it because like it was really cool. And I want to say it was in the first one, and it was like a dragon that's in the sewers or something, and like it first pops a small thing that looks like a little head, but then it opens up, and that's actually just like not even its entire like upper part is the mouth, and it's like, oh wow, I just
just mixed in a little bit of body horror in your depressing fantasy game, right? Yeah.
I see, and that's
we've
the
got
thing.
gothic horror, we've got body horror, we've got eldritch horror.
And see, I guess that's actually I never fixed the Nightbot. Oh well. I guess that's actually a thing that is really strange because I do not like body horror, but like for creatures like that, that's nothing, right? Like my mind is like, yeah, whatever, it's not that bad. To some degree, there's some things that I'm like that shouldn't exist, aka horse golem.
Classic.
But overall,
always haunt you.
Will always haunt me. But overall, I think my like big thing with like body horror, especially, is when it's about like human forms that are twisted in a way. I don't know. That's something for me and my psychologist when I find one to figure out.
No, I totally get that. It's like human body horror is really like shocking, but I think kind of fascinating also. It's like this
I just
like morbid curiosity. That's the word. Like, oh my god, I don't know if you know that one artist who makes like sculptures of humans, but there's always something off. And
I don't know anything about that.
I don't know why. You probably would find them horrifying, but I just find them fascinating.
I mean, obviously, you just gotta share them onto the Discord, and so that obviously I can freak out, but everyone else can enjoy looking at them.
Maybe I should just share it in private with the others, because I think.
I mean, I can ignore something. You can also set it to do the thing to where I don't have to see it, but it's fine. Let's go to the next question.
Don't look, Kyle.
I will not look. I'm
Just
blind.
that is the gentleman.
Just don't look. New channel, don't look, Kyle. And it's literally all body horror stuff. And it's like, of course, me being me, my curiosity would get the best of me, and then I just see it and I just hate myself. I'm like, why would I do this? I know what's in there.
Like, the sculptures are not about horror.
Right.
It's, as she said it, it's more about exploring the boundaries between humans and animals, and if they're really that different. I
mean, that sounds
She kind of
really
makes
cool
human animals hybrids that lean more towards the human side.
So that would be more of the, what's it called? Something Valley. I forget the term.
Uncanny Valley.
Uncanny Valley, yes. That's exactly what I was thinking. That it would be more about that. And I mean, I'm okay with Uncanny Valley stuff. It's literally just body horror weirdness that I'm not necessarily a fan of. Moving on to the actual topic, though. How about mid-bosses that were bad and whatnot in other media? Just in general, bad mid-bosses that we can kind of like remember or recall, that we just kind of like, that was unsatisfactory for some reason.
Was it Sekiro, Darkness, whatever that game was? Can't remember the Twice in Darkness or whatever it was. That one had some pretty, at least I felt, maybe because I didn't go about the correct direction I was supposed to, but I felt like their mid-bosses weren't very well designed, in the fact that if you literally did not have the specific item necessary to beat them, they were impossibly difficult. Not impossible, I should say. They were very, very difficult to a point that it became hard to play, which just kind of felt like bad design, especially in an open world kind of system, where all of a sudden it's like, well, everybody can get to this boss from a different direction, so having it built on what's happened so far doesn't make sense. But that's the first one that comes to mind for like a bad mid-boss that I can really think of.
Okay.
It's my turn? Or,
yeah.
Like the first thought, of course, is the classic pinwheel from Dark Souls, which is way too weak at the point where you actually fight him. Depending on your build, you can like 4-shot him, and he's supposed to be a boss, a Dark Souls boss.
Okay.
And he's kind of weird, since you can technically get to him relatively early on, but you have to take like the most difficult, obvious route. I think that's why they didn't make him that strong. But usually you only go there once you are in the end game to get to the bosses that are behind him. And at that point, he's just pathetically weak for a Dark Souls boss. And, I mean, screw the area before him with the immortal skeletons and all those wheeled skeletons. But, especially compared to the area before him, that has so many annoyances and difficulties, and one wrong step and you're just falling down into the abyss. But he's just like, and he's done.
Okay. Yeah. So it just
to the point, that
I was just saying, so it just does, as a mid boss, it just doesn't feel right. As a boss, it just doesn't feel right because it's so weak. And I mean, I can get that. What about you, Eternal?
For me, I really immediately went to the like Nintendo 64 Bomberman games. They just felt like they were there. There's not a single one out of games I loved that I can tell you anything about.
Okay.
And like I thought about looking some of them up, but I thought it would actually emphasize the bad design, the lack of tying into the story or the area they were from, the lack of uniqueness, there wasn't one I'm like, oh, that was really difficult, except technically the guy that betrays you mid-game, which is technically the secret final boss, so it's kind of not necessarily a mid-boss, it's actually like some secret boss.
Right.
So he had deep story brought in, but every single area that you went to, the boss of that area just seemed like, oh, okay, so we got to design the bosses real quick. Let's get that done, then release the game. Seemed like just last minute, they didn't put a lot of effort because I can't tell you anything about them.
Okay. So yeah, well they have like less narrative impact and yeah. Um for me personally, I honestly can't think of too many that I dislike a lot. Uh normally I though all of the bad ones, and I think this is just a problem with myself because like when I experience a bad mid boss, I think I just like, well, it's over now. I don't have to think about it again, and literally erase it from my brain so I never have to think about it again. um, but the thing that keeps popping into me is they're popping up to me, and this is gonna be actually against some things that's already been said, especially from me, especially for what shirt I'm wearing, but one of my least favorite mid-boss types will be Shadow Link from Legend of Zelda. Like, I like the concept, I just don't like mirror matches, right? I've always felt that they was really awkward in a design space, and, like, I would rather see them, or see things like that that are a little bit more, I don't know, if you're gonna have a mirror match, like keep the same like abilities and stuff. Not like in the N64, it literally just did what you do. So the only way to really win is from doing moves and whatnot, techniques and stuff that like have higher priority than the mirror. Um, like there, you pretty much have to know how to cheese the fight. Um, but like yeah, I think that's kind of my thing is like if the because I mean there's been times where Shadow Link or any sort of shadow copy of the group or whatever can be done correctly, but it just I've also seen them where it just felt really bad going into that fight and playing that fight because I don't feel like you're really needing to test anything besides knowing maybe a gimmick to cheese the fight or something.
Reminds me of the mimic tier from Elden Ring.
Okay.
I don't know if you know the story about he's literally a mirror boss in the sense that he transforms in a version of yourself, but he also has like a very stupid cheesing strategy. He copies you as you are at the start of the combat. So if you go in naked with no weapons, he transforms into a naked version of you. And then you just put on all your weapons and armor.
Right. I think that definitely is one of the ones that I would say is a bad, in a weird way. Well, do I think that's bad or really cool that that's, ooh, man, I don't know. I have mixed feelings because like on some part of it, yeah, no, that's kind of bad, but like I know the intent was never for people to like cheese it by taking their clothes off.
Yep. If you ignore the cheesing strategy, I think it's a decent boss. It just with the cheesing strategy, it gets ridiculous because an unarmed character in Elden Ring is incredibly weak. You could probably just stand there 5 minutes, him just punching you, and you would still be alive, even if you're a squishy character.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird way to play on the meta
Mm-hmm.
to defeat that boss.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't cheese him.
But I guess that kind of fits in with everything we're kind of all saying about mid bosses is that they do kind of exist in a meta space.
Mm-hmm.
They are there to test mechanics, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're there to generally give the hero a place to show off a new ability. Like they are a narrative tool more than they are like a goal, right? They exist to be defeated, but they exist to reveal to the character, here's how you defeat Mirror You. Here's how you activate the final tier of your special sword. Here's where you realize the real power was in you the whole time, right?
Yeah.
In that sense, mid bosses are kind of a meta concept.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's why I don't like some of the shadow clone links or shadow bosses, is because like a lot of the times it's not them testing anything new as much as just it almost feels like they're throwing it in there because they know that concept is a commonly accepted trope in the video game sense. Not that it's actually an interesting challenge or an interesting
I
test.
agree. I'd always thought of a way that video games could, like, if you're doing your Lego build-a-block character and choosing abilities, what if they had built in a matrix to polarize your choices? And when you got to your mirror battle, you're literally not facing you. You're facing you that went down a darker path, or if you were playing an evil character, one that went down a more holy path. You're literally fighting your worst enemy. A true test of your abilities against the same willpower, drive, and power you hold.
Well, not exactly the same, because you can restart. No, that's a different joke.
Oh, fair enough. Yes, I autosave. We have god powers.
Right.
But no, I think that would have made them actually cool instead of just, we're at one of these.
Right.
To me, it's disappointing when I show up one. They were never cool. And I love shadow stuff. I think it can be really cool and really well done, but it always just tries to mimic you. And I'm like, that could be a cool side ability, like one could have as an illusionist, but it doesn't need to be its main thing.
Or even just throwing in unique powers that only that thing can do because of being a clone or shadow or what have you. Like that could be really interesting in and of itself.
Yeah. Like picture of Shadow Link whenever he did the spinning of the sword or any powered up sword attack, it would send shadow energy out a certain distance based off of the amount of charge done.
Right. But yeah, I don't want to get too lost in discussing shadow bosses, but like I do think that they can be done right. Like obviously there has been times where they do feel right. But it is one of those things where if you're just slotting it in just to slot in that fight, then maybe you shouldn't consider slotting in that fight. Maybe try and think of something else that feels a little bit better. And of course, always take things like these statements with grains of salt, because, sometimes you want that sort of bland scenario for some reason. Maybe to make something else be a little bit more tasty. That being said, why not we transition to actually talking about tabletop mid bosses? How about the question being times we used mid bosses and maybe the cool things we did with them? I do not have an answer ready for this question. So does anybody have something they can go ahead and say while I think of something?
No, you start.
Okay. I'm gonna actually go to Curse of Strahd.
Okay.
I love the way that it was used because mechanically you're not meant to win. It kind of throws the trope on its head because you're meant to feel a certain atmosphere in Barovia. You're meant to feel hopeless, helpless, and like there is just you're not going to win.
Mm-hmm.
So it's recommended that Strahd is used to come in and communicate with you. And the moment the players try anything he wouldn't like or they disagree with him, tear him up and leave him bleeding. And do this. Offer them to come to dinner and don't do anything. If they attack you, fall through the floor and call your people in and then lock them out of the castle. You're meant to do weird shit. You're cat and mouse playing with them. But Strahd is literally the mini boss, mid boss, and final boss. Because everything else is just some shit that's happened because he did it.
Okay.
He's cursed something, ruined someone fell into madness. But he's the thing that keeps arriving and keeps showing up. And to me, that hits the boxes and tabletop, kind of like the Dragoon thing I'd mentioned earlier. Except for the comedy, you're not meant to really be laughing in Barovia.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you can be. I'm not gonna judge
You
anybody
can,
who
but I
laughs.
think you're going mad at that point.
I mean, aren't we all a little mad? Mad Hatter vibes. Anyways.
I think like my favorite mid boss that I ever used in a game was cursed on that. He was a lieutenant. It was an Eberron setting. He was a lieutenant of the Emerald Claw, that fanatic necromancy cult. And yeah, he was a lieutenant there. He was cursed, so he couldn't like really die. Like you could kill him, but if anybody got his dead body from the order, they could just revive him like that. And he was just this reoccurring mini boss, basically, which players kept killing, but they never really disposed of the body correctly. What they didn't know that he had a sister who always like came looking for him where he went if he didn't come back, and oh, there he is. I'll resurrect him.
Okay.
And I really like. I think what's cool about the mid boss is if he's like reoccurring, but more of a nuisance than like a re-threat. But I mean, yes, he can also be a re-threat, right? There are multiple ways of going. But I liked about how Lazarus, especially when later on become more like a nuisance, like, oh, not this guy again. Eventually, they caught him, brought him to their high priest of their order, and she vaporized him. So yeah, no coming back from that.
Okay. Jeff, do you have something?
Jeff,
or
do you have any?
I think I might have.
Yeah,
one
I'm trying to
myself.
ponder if I have any standout ones to me that seem cooler, because a lot of times, yeah, I mean, mid bosses are exactly that. They're usually a way for me to kind of sneak in new weapons to the players or introduce new ideas of things that we're going to be doing for the next part. So though I give them personalities or behaviors or whatnot, they just don't really stick in my mind as a longtime GM.
Right.
As you know what I mean? Like I can remember it's like, oh yeah, I had the one that kind of I had the one that was planar themed, or I had the one that was shadow themed. I had these things, but they don't stand out as much in my head as a full character to remember. I don't know if that sounds bad for those poor NPCs.
I mean, personally, I get it, because I think that's what my issue is to some degree. Is like I'm thinking, and honestly, I guess I've never really had any mid boss that's been reoccurring. They've mostly been one-off situations. They was designed for the narrative, for their purpose, and then left alone. Right? Like, so going to take your moment to talk and just kind of like, because the only one I can even think of for myself, and it is literally I can call it a mid boss because of where it was in the grand story, but it was designed specifically to be an end boss for a mini shot. So like a one shot, but actually kind of went through a couple of different. I think we had to do 3 sessions of it because of time and things. Like it was just a very short campaign. It was supposed to be a boss for that campaign. For the big bad for that campaign. But the players enjoyed that game so much that we continued. So essentially it was a mid-boss, but it wasn't designed to be a mid-boss, or at least not in the more traditional sense. I still have the stats for him, and I can tell you why it was interesting, and it's because it wasn't a bland fight. To me, that's really what sells mid bosses and even bigger bosses, is that their fights have to be more than just common combat sim. Like they have to have more things involved than just, or at least for me, they have to have more things involved than just the common attack actions. This boss that I'm specifically thinking of was a slime boss made with the explosive ichor, which I've talked about before. Was actually in the last time we did a talk, we talked about I had like this slime substance that was explosive that I had a dungeon designed for. I brought that concept into this world, using it as a corruption sort of thing, and this boss was all about corrupting this very sanctified location, and turning that corruption into these slimes that exploded. He himself was weak to fire, which was a whole point of kind of the thing of you actually had to use the slimes he was making that it was attacking you, to then throw at him to cause explosions on him. And it was just kind of like that, which was a cool fight. But yeah, I just never really thought of him as a mid boss, but he technically was, because narratively how I slotted him into it, that's where he was. He was not going to return. He was only there to do kind of the final capstone for that area. So.
And it sounds like a fun fight, but yeah, that definitely does check off all the mid boss talking points I think we've brought up.
Yeah.
They require special mechanics. They're meant to be like they have a clear path to defeat through mechanics, specific usually to their region or era or location in the game.
Yeah. So I kind of took your spot, Jeff. Did you think of anything you wanted to throw out there or whatnot?
No, I think that.
Okay.
I think what I said originally still fits well enough.
That's awesome. So yeah. See, I didn't write down the actual questions like I did last time, so I've kind of been going off of remembering what we discussed last time and for dungeons and applying it, but I'm coming at a point where I'm like forgetting what we talked about. I think.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to bring up a thought because I noticed a difference. Like, yes, we all hit on the mechanical testing and kind of theming, but there was a lot more story emphasis on mine. So maybe kind of like story versus just testing the players. Like, do you think it's a different design, or do you think it benefits by combining these elements?
I definitely think, and this is mine, and everyone can have a fair share or fair shake at their own thing, but I do think that it's the same concept, because you can have definitely the story related bits. In my example, I didn't really talk about the story bits because I didn't really want to get too deep into that campaign and why I kind of like check marked it as a mid boss. But the quick summation is the main reason they was even there wasn't to fight this thing. It was actually because they was looking for their friend, and they only got like they all had the same friend, and that friend had gone missing. They all went there, found the thing, and it seemed like that thing had taken the dude, but lo and behold, he wasn't there when they actually ended up finishing that. So it just kind of was like that sort of like that was just a stepping stone for them for the greater major plot point. Like they got more clues after the fight, etc. But again, like I said, I just didn't go into that side of it. But I do agree definitely that like a mid-boss, a proper mid-boss should definitely fit into it narratively. I don't think that it's necessarily a different concept, though I will say there's sometimes where, I mean, because different styles of jamming exists, so some people might be more mechanical than story emphasis, and so some mid bosses will be more mechanical than than narrative, and vice versa. To be honest, sometimes they'll be super narrative bosses that mechanically are kind of bland, but they fit wonderfully in the setting and in the story. So maybe the players don't notice, or maybe that's good for the players because they really like that style. Of course, that gets into the whole different discussion of, you know, GM styles and game styles. But yeah, I'll pass that to somebody else if somebody wants to say things.
Couldn't we like maybe take like a 5-minute break, refill water and so on? It is rather hot after all. I mean, I could also just disappear for 5 minutes.
You can disappear for 5 minutes. We can always bring you back. So, like,
okay,
give you a description because I mean, yeah, I mean, we're good. We're good.
Okay, then I'll do like Jeff and just disappear and come back. Be right back.
Okay.
See, I do agree that a lot of it could end up being like game master play style and the tables, like what they desire. Because like a lot of my design when I'm doing like a campaign or like what's this villain doing, I have this kind of like family tree looking breakdown that affects whatever they're doing. So we can just have the players play in the world, but things are going on. So when I have a mid-boss, there is actually a task or a position or something in that matrix. So it's automatically tied to the story and therefore the setting because the villain is tied to the setting and so would their actions.
Yeah.
So for my design style, it just happens automatically. So that's why you'll always hear like a huge emphasis of like making... Like, I made my characters give all of the secrets to the villain because the villain in this one campaign is in disguise to get close to the party to get them to trust him so that they let him get close to this other person.
Right.
Which the villain is trying to take.
Sure.
So they're slowly letting it done. That campaign ended. I told them, oh yeah, this person was this person. And there was silence. There was one of them that didn't talk to me for 3 weeks. They felt literally betrayed.
Rude.
Because they started going, dude, this place does not deserve you. You are a godsend to this area. Like my roommates knew what's going on. They had to leave the room.
That's funny.
Or else they were gonna laugh. So it's like when you build things in like that, it only adds to your overall, like, I guess, the atmosphere and everything at which you're giving to the players.
Right.
Like, I learn psychology as often as I can because I've learned that gives me a lot of extra tools as a game master.
Right. I definitely agree. I don't disagree anyways. I do add in a lot of story.
What is this about psychological torture?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that's all that
Do you want to
tabletop
talk
is.
about Strahd?
I mean, all tabletop is just psychological torture, right? No, it's therapy. No, it's... Man, your laugh always gets me. But, I had words, and I forgot what they were. Cool.
Sorry that I'm so distracting.
It's all good. but I definitely agree. And I mean, I do add more narrative flair than I'm letting off because I don't want to necessarily spend too much time talking about the random one-shots or multi-shots or long campaigns I've ran. But I could definitely dig into those and get into more of the narrative stuff because I do love the narrative things. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, going back into bosses though. I guess I do have another question that came into my mind. If we want to go with that, or does somebody else have a topic of mid bosses that they want to start? No. Okay.
Not yet.
Not yet. Cool. So I'm going to go into start talking about mid boss like proper design. Excuse me. Damn it.
Everything's fine.
Just hiccup burps. You know, when you hiccup and burp at the same time, it hurts like a sumbitch. Okay, what was I saying? Oh, the question. Actually going into some of the mechanical or story design process of when you're wanting to come up with the mid boss, do you have a method that you go with? Is there certain concepts that you like to make sure that you hit on? I mean, obviously the story stuff, but like, is there anything more than that? Like, what sort of processes do you have for that sort of design?
So it's really actually clear cut and easy. I want to know why my villain exists in this area, like the BBEG.
Mm-hmm.
And then I need to know what his goal is. Once I know what his goal is, I can determine 3 to 5 things that have to be accomplished for that to happen, and 3 to 5 things that have to be done for each one of those. I now need a commander in charge of each of that first tier of stuff below him, and a subordinate commander in charge of each of the things under each of that. I now have a series of mini bosses in connected story and series of things the players can wander into. Here, one example I have is there are pirates searching the shores for an artifact in one of my settings. And so the town, they'll go down and look at what these weird lights on the shore are, and the pirates will just kidnap them or kill them. And so people disappear, so they think they're whites or something else floating around on the shore. So, hey, adventurer, go kill these ghost things. Turns out it's pirates, and unveils this bigger thing, and it keeps building up. So I build that matrix so that it gets down to what does the NPC describe what they're seeing, and that creates a kind of mystery around whatever they're seeing. And so they have a sandbox open world they can experience that there's actually a very detailed built-in story with individual characters that all have positions. If it's an evil organization, you might build a twist to one of them to, you know, like, hey, they don't want to die. Maybe they'll tell you something about something else going on because they happen to be from that group up above, so they can tell you a detail here, but not about the other things that are a part of the whole big story for the villain. So that way, I'm not worried about how to tie them together. I'm not worried about how to tie them to the story. I'm not worried about so much because I started with the villain and I ended up with lights by the shore or quakes in the city.
Okay.
So mid-boss design, huh? Story-wise, I do like the approach of like the lieutenant, right? So you can have it's a fairly easy mid-boss concept to come up with. I mean, Eternal basically already said everything about it, right? Lazarus was also a lieutenant guy, right? Then after him came his sister, who was the one who kept resurrecting him, who was a significantly stronger necromancer. And afterwards, it was like the 3 second in commands of the main evil guy, and then the final with the big boss guy. It gives you a very easy ladder of escalation.
Okay.
Mechanical wise, I guess I don't really design them that much different than bosses, you know. Either I take the approach elite guy with lots of minions, or take the single super powerful boss that can take on the whole party design, right?
Mm-hmm.
And either way, they're basically just a weaker version of the end boss, just with their own strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
At least in my systems, I have multiple creature categories.
Mm-hmm.
Minor, normal, elite, and boss. Boss is excellent if you really want that one creature encounter. And elite is great if you want the one strong guy with many smaller minions approach. Or maybe it can even be like a team, again, a bit the idea of the shadow boss that you have like an equivalent to the player characters, that it's just an elite team. That could also be a mini boss, right, with multiple elite type enemies fighting together. But yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add that Eternal didn't already say. So, Jeff.
As far as mid-boss design, I think a majority of what I do is kind of come up with just a fun or doofy way to make them stand out and then build backwards from there. I'm a big fan of using mid-bosses that aren't combat characters because players expect to some extent that you'll get to the final awesome big boss fight and you'll get to go all out and Kamehameha everything and explode the world, whatever you need. But I enjoy kind of taking those mid bosses as to like, oh, hey, here's this like, third tier middle management advisor in this political position. And they're just the exact guy who can deny you what you need to be able to progress, right? So you have to find like, this is a good place to force the players to kind of have to interact and maybe you can't beat this one up.
Right.
But it's also very fun to be like, oh, hey, this guy shoots ice crystals out of his eyeballs or something. And, blah, blah, go from there.
Yes.
Oh, classic ice balls out of the eyeballs.
Or something.
But yeah, I think a lot of that design, a lot of my design for mid-bosses usually is trying to find a place to either present new ideas to the players or to show them how something functions either in game or in the world. Is usually where I find my best use of them, so that so the players can kind of show off either through their own knowledge of how the world works, right? Showing system mastery, or being able to show off maybe a cool new trick or something, right? If the ranger just got some favorite enemy construct, then it's probably not a bad idea to throw in a few robots with this mid boss, so that way that player can show those things off that they can do now that they could not before.
Okay. Yeah.
I did think of one thing mechanically to add.
Okay.
Villainous actions. They are something like, you hear legendary actions a lot, but they have their place. But like, picture the villainous actions of being able to, like, you have no allies around you. You're that elite unit like in Blaze's system. So now you use this action as a bonus action during your turn to now call in 1d4 extra allies. And they're basic small little guys, but they add a problem. Maybe you have a thing where it's like they fear failing you so much that if they just hit 0 and don't go below, they actually gain 1 HP and stay up for one until that's done. It only works once. You got little small tweaks you can do that actually bestow that status of they're actually, above the status of your regular old villains or commanders. They're actually that mini boss or mid boss or.
Yeah. No, I definitely like the idea of special actions, villainous, or whatever you want to call them, for that sort of design space for them that makes so much sense to do. And I mean, I definitely encourage that with a lot of the systems I've seen or ran or made. Yeah. So I'm going to answer this my way as well before we go on to the next sort of question. So for myself, when designing mid-bosses, and I guess to kind of like open up and allow you guys to peek through the curtain through my design when I'm running games in general, I am kind of like what that sort of narrative thing that you guys was talking about of just coming up with like a big bad and then growing from there. But see, honestly, a lot of my design is, and a lot of my hints, things that I do with my players is I don't design a big bad at the beginning of the game. I actually come up with multiple different things going on in the world, and then I see where the players are going, and I slowly start developing those, as well as because I kind of let me go about this in a different way. I design multiple quote unquote factions in a very generic sense of like what are those people's goals, how are they influencing the world and wanting to do within that world, and then when the players start interacting with things and start making their characters, starting to go through the first couple of sessions and stuff, I see what they're interested in the world to tackle, and then I will start designing the thing that they care about more, while still keeping the other stuff around to help show that sort of to help sell that not the living world that is going on. But I don't put that much effort into those factions because, well, obviously I don't need to at that point. But I might need to be able to take, say, they're focused on one faction that they want to take down that, like, maybe is an evil adventuring guild, right? They're solely focused on that because that sounded really cool to be an adventuring guild going against this evil one that's, like, literally causing the problems that they're fixing. So there's like, yeah, let's take those guys down. So, they're building all that. But then I have that evil adventuring guild have to also deal with the super, like, arcane cult, like, that's trying to summon an elder beast. And maybe there's some weird interaction with those two things. And so now that's a really interesting thing for the players to go and tackle. Because, there's two sides, both bad, or at least not good, to tackle. And so how do you interact with that scenario? And of course, keeping in the flow for the mid-bosses, how does that tie into the mid-bosses is that I then will create the mid-bosses for the quote-unquote dungeon that is for. So in the scenario that there is the two factions that I talked about are together, that mid boss probably will actually be two mid bosses that's designed to do whatever is there. But because I have those two things, because of that whole like world connection, there's like that really living scenario of how am I going to tie that? How am I going to make that an interesting mid-boss fight and kind of work it from that end? So, admittedly, very similar, but I do like to make my world as living as possible. And that's just kind of that whole shebang with it is I do a lot of stuff, and so I start ending up like that I think it's Sunnier in Philadelphia meme with the red lines, yard lines. Like that is my notes when I'm running games, is literally just a bunch of that, like cigarette hanging from my mouth. I mean, I don't smoke cigarettes, but still just that. This is what's going on, right? Like,
you get the little candy cigarettes,
right? And I'm just all freaking for it and just all going crazy.
Like when I say that, like, I design a villain for like a adventure, keep in mind I've already designed a setting with all the factions. There's gonna be people that are villainous. There's gonna be individual powerful good people. And that's all separate from like when I designed the story and build that section of villains. They're just now a part of the story, or they were always there. Like if I was to design Barovia, I would have designed the setting and had all of that stuff there the same way I was discussing, but you still have the Silver Knight faction, you still have the Vistani, you still have the other realms of dread, and all of those can interact. I put a heavy emphasis on time using the faction and renown system. As you get more known, your actions travel further. Mm-hmm. If it happens to overlap this thing here that would either support or hinder you, they're now involved in the story.
Sure.
So I kind of keep those things tracked, what they're doing over time, what they will or will not support or go against, and allow a little point system based off of everything the party does to interact with that.
For sure.
So that's how I kind of accomplished the red line thing.
Yeah. Okay. I have nothing else to say about that topic. Is there any questions? No. Cool.
Let's see.
None that I have so far.
Right.
I say unmuted.
I find it funny that the exact moment you asked, are there any questions, my aunt sent me a question.
I'm actually a psychic,
if
right?
I think the question what kind of lotion I like isn't like relevant to our story.
What type of lotion would your mid-bosses use? No. I think that in and of itself is a good question, because I know that was something that Jeff kind of brought up, and that's loot for mid-bosses, right? Like, because obviously a mid-boss is just like any other encounter, but like it's not, in the sense that you can, or you are encouraged to have, obviously the players do the thing, so they deserve some form of loot. And especially if your mid-bosses are normally humanoid creatures, to at least have weapons the players can steal. So what is your take on how to handle loot for mid-bosses? Do you like to give a lot more to kind of like reward the players, or do you still keep it in like some sort of faux realism, they have what they had?
I feel like mid bosses are a really good place to give specific items to players. You know, if this is if you want to sneak in that holy sword for the paladin, mid bosses are a great way to do that. Or maybe just in general, I think mid bosses are just a great vehicle for handing over MacGuffins. However you want to do it, because they're meant to explore new things and they're meant to be defeated. They can come with cool prizes at the end that make it more fun for the players, because they're meant to crush these guys. It's not the end of the game. You know, it doesn't matter if you give your end bad guy, you know, Vorpal, you know, everything, because once they beat him, you're like, cool, thanks for playing, we're done. So mid bosses represent a great place to kind of get that quick, like 7-Eleven shopping in, right? You want to get them sweet steak taquitos and whatnot. Your mid boss is perfect for being there with a Slurpee to hand off to the players while they go on to better adventures.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I can definitely see that. For myself, I actually will say that that's might be one of the weakest areas of myself, is giving loot at the end of something like that. But then again, I'm also of the sort of mentality of, I definitely, because of the type of way that I play games, I normally give players access to like a lot of materials to be crafty if they want to be crafty and make their own gear. So maybe I don't give them like a lot of unique things, but allow them to make their own unique things a lot more. And of course, mid bosses would just be a really good place for them to kind of come up with how they would handle that. giving them a reason, because I normally do like to give them a little preview of what they might be handling, what they might need to handle, and then they can come up with something. And of course, giving them the resources to come up with thing to maybe tackle that mid boss, and then now they have a neat tool for next time.
Blaze, are you going there? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I was choking a bit on water. That's why.
Isn't that called drowning? Please don't drown on stream. I would feel bad. If you're going to drown, please don't wait. Please wait to drown out of stream. Maybe wait till after your game.
To die on stream. That's against Twitch policy. Anyway, yes, loot. It's a good place to give them magic items, right? And even if it's more of a brutish enemy that doesn't have nice armor, weapons, or magic items that you give them, you can still allow players to harvest the materials, right? Mm-hmm. In Ishanek and World Shapers, I have a specific rule that creatures of this level, of this rank, give this amount of resources depending on what you roll on your check, right? And so I think it's a good way to reward your players, be directly saying, "Oh, the enemy had this amulet of invisibility, and now it's yours." But also, hey, you fought a young dragon. I'm pretty sure that his scales and his blood can be very valuable. But the one thing you need to be careful about is don't give them too powerful things, because if the players remember to loot them, the players have them, right? So you need this fine balance of giving your mid bosses cool stuff and not giving them extremely valuable stuff and making your players overpowered after they beat him, right?
Right. I mean, players having a holy hand grenade might break a boss fight in later sessions.
Yeah.
I'm typically like adding to the stuff because they'd mentioned stuff that I have added in, but I'm gonna go with the story side of it again. This is the perfect place at like the lieutenant example that keeps coming up. Having a letter from his superior saying what he's here doing, giving you more details than you may be able to get from them. Maybe you're intercepting a group traveling in between a place and they have a letter and some magic items that are meant to help you get through a place, and it now tells you the location. You had no idea about that part of operation until that moment. So when your players are consistently, not following the signs and moving away from plot hooks, let them randomly decide to, instead of go to the mountain cave, now make it a tunnel into going down into the ground, or make it be a forest maze. Just switch stuff around with it, and you can use that item drop at that moment to do it. You can give a name, put a seal down, have a ring now that's meant to be the signet marker so that you can have someone use charisma to get through a situation, because they don't know what they look like, but now they got the item. Doesn't necessarily need to be magical. The story element can push so much into it. And so adding upon the magic items and just better equipment, you've got that element that's also a great deal for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Words and science and sentences and math. Okay. But yeah, no, what you're saying, definitely. And I think we're all kind of like, we all have our own different styles, but yeah, I can agree definitely with the different loots and such. We did get a question up front from chat from Corrosive Squid of like, how is everyone?
Doing good.
Decent, I guess.
Yeah. I bet you're probably warm or something still out there.
I actually got
a
this
fan.
old thing out, so now it's not that bad. I guess my stubbornness reached its limits, and now I'm using technology. I mean, all technology. I mean, look at this. Look at the colors, almost yellow. I think this probably at least 15 years old.
Yeah, that's got some strong mid 90s vibes coming off that bad boy.
Yeah, probably more like 20 years older. I've got that from my parents, so.
I mean, if you want to try and get that yellow, works. If you want to try and get that yellow off, do try 1 part vinegar, white wine vinegar if you can, and 1 part water. Mix that up, maybe with a dash, a little bit of soap, and then apply that and clean that off. That is actually really good. Even gets cigarette tar off of it, because this is just from my experience from IT, because obviously that is some things that I've had to deal with, because cigarette tar, I don't know if you've ever had to deal with that, especially getting into keyboards. Ugh. Because then the buttons on the keyboard actually gets sticky after years and years of being right next to the cigarette smoke. But
thankfully, my parents never smoked, so.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm just saying, like, if it's yellowing, that's just a really good tip that I've learned thanks to IT.
Thank you, but I don't really mind if it has this vintage look.
That's fine. I was just throwing it out there.
Well, I remember it, definitely.
Cool.
If I ever don't live alone anymore, and how my room looks starts to get important, right?
Right. When you start having guests or something, I don't know how you live.
Let's just say the camera has a very specific angle for a reason.
That's fair. Same. I'm in the technically the front room, but I don't consider it like the actual like front room in the sense like a living room, I guess. We're never in this room because it's really hot in this room. But if I had this camera pointed in any other direction, you would see a lot of mess.
This is the farthest I could move before you start seeing stuff that you're not supposed to see.
Fair. Going back on topic, mid-bosses. What else can we discuss about mid-bosses? I should have wrote down more questions, and I feel really bad about it.
Hey, you wrote down questions, unlike some of us here, so I think that still makes you, like, you don't need to feel bad.
Yeah, you brought questions to a questionnaire, as opposed to the rest of us that showed up disarmed.
I mean...
That being said, I don't think we have much else to really cover on mid-bosses. I mean, they're a fun concept, right? They, whether used for narrative purposes, loot purposes, I think all of us kind of in our own ways said how they are a vehicle for us to move the game forward. They are great sources to hide information, as Eternal is saying, or like as I was saying, like I like to give some loot with them to help reset that. Yeah, I think they're a fun story beat that I think allows you to kind of reposition your campaign, right? You beat a boss, you find out some cool information, you can give the player some cool loot, they can be a little bit stronger now, kind of let you, repeat that, level 1 through 5 kind of cycle again. Like, cool, they're going to beat up some monsters again, they've gotten some new stuff, and now they're working towards the next mid-boss that shows up at level 10, or however you play your game. But
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to force it to the end.
No,
like I said earlier, no.
I was
You
just
what?
gonna say I do agree. I mean, we can go ahead and end it early. I mean, I think that gives, 30 more minutes than we normally would end. But I mean, I do think that we did cover a big majority of the concepts. I do think there could be other things. So obviously, anybody watching now or in the future, if you have questions, ask them, and we can always just maybe we'll do a part 2 of this discussion, or add them into maybe when we talk about actual major bosses, the big bad evil guys and whatnot. We can kind of throw those questions in. So that being said, I will also imply of adding joining the Discord, which I believe there's a link now in my Twitch down below, the answer to joining the T3N Discord, which you can join that, find out what we're talking about the week prior if we say things. I know we didn't do that this time because, well, we kind of discussed vocally what we was going to discuss. So that was my B. I should have probably said that, but it's fine. Let's go ahead and just kind of like, do you guys want to say your buys and where to find you, and all that fun stuff?
I mean, you can find us here pretty much every Sunday.
Yeah.
But bye.
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 Bye. Bye.